Hello, and welcome to the 61st episode of Recluse Horror. This is a daily horror movie review podcast. So just a little background on the project. Back 238 days ago on my birthday, I decided I wanted to watch and review a horror movie every single day. I have done so, as I said, for the past 238 days, although only the last 61 have been podcasts. Before that, it was text reviews. So each episode, or most episodes, I talk about two movies, one of which I've watched that very night, and another that I've reviewed previously in text, aided, of course, by the text reviews itself. So, today the movie that I watched was The Maiden from 2016. It's a short film, as per usual. I was decently impressed with this one, actually. It's definitely not my favorite movie, but the effects were really good. The acting was really good. The location was quite interesting without being overbearing. And although the subject matter is not something that generally appeals to me very much, it did it effectively, and I think the length being it's a little over 10 minutes, I think. I think that really helped make it a little bit more digestible than I tend to find these movies. So, the story essentially is about a realtor who's trying to sell a very unpopular house. I'm pretty sure you can figure out where this one is going, so I don't think there's really any harm in talking about it. But if you don't want to be mildly spoiled beyond that premise, you can probably skip. I don't know. I don't think I'll talk more than maybe 10 minutes about it. So you can probably skip 10 minutes. I'll give you a moment to do so. So yeah, this one was pretty good. As I said, you can probably see where this one is going, and it's a haunting movie. But as far as those go, it was, I mean, there are definitely some things that were sort of eye-rolling, I guess, just in my personal opinion. As soon as you see it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And there are, at least if you've seen any of my reviews, or listened to any of my reviews, rather, at this point, it's probably pretty obvious what I'm going to roll my eyes at. But, yeah, the effects were really good. The shots were framed very well. All the technical aspects were really there, or at least, definitely better than what you find in most short films. And the effects were clever as well. Like, the way that they used them was I mean, it's not that you wouldn't see it in stuff, but it's better effects used more cleverly than I feel like you see in some movies. And again, the length of it being not a feature-length hour-and-a-half movie, and still containing what I feel like is mostly an hour-and-a-half length. Like, this same thing could be made into a feature-length film, and has probably been made into a feature-length film, with just as much, pertinent material. This did a very good job of condensing what I particularly find to be generally a sort of boring premise, while still leaving, parts of it that I would be interested in. If they made a sequel to this, which I don't think it really necessarily lends itself to, and I doubt that they would make a sequel to it, but if they did, I'd be interested if it went into some of the backstory and the theme a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. There's not really much to say about this because everything's kind of a spoiler. There are some parts that are genuinely sort of, I guess, unnerving, which I particularly liked that there were any parts to it that was like, And again, the acting was really impressive. The woman who played the lead actually looked familiar. I briefly looked at what she's known for and didn't find anything that I was familiar with, but I definitely didn't go over her whole thing. I just went to the section of IMDb that says known for, and didn't see anything that I saw. So it's possible that I've seen her in something. But yeah, she was very good. All of the acting in it, though, was very good. As far as negatives, most of the negatives that I could point out, things that I would consider negatives anyway, are pretty much spoilers. So I can't really talk about them. But honestly, I think the positives in this one outweigh it, especially since it's A, free, and B, a short film. And yeah, I think, like I said, I think the length makes what could easily be just padded out and, fillered into a feature length. It really cuts through the bullshit a little bit. And just gives you the parts of a movie, of a horror movie, of a haunting movie that, like, you actually want to see, the parts that are interesting, without, like, watering it down to the point of, like, tedium. So, yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have to say about it. This one particularly, as the genre is very clear just from the premise, it's really hard to talk about anything specifically. So I guess I'll just cut it here. But yeah, I would sort of suggest this one, particularly if you're into haunting movies, or if, honestly, conversely, if you don't like haunting movies and, like, find them, sort of tedious. I feel like this one, again, because of the length, I know I've said it 15 times, but because of the length, I feel like this one is short and sweet and to the point. The ending could kind of left a bit to be desired for me personally. It's the ending starts out on a good note and then ends, like, the very end is kind of just like, But, honestly, I've seen a lot worse. There are plenty of questions at the end of it, but nothing that you, like, really need to know. It would be interesting if they wrote that well and made it into either a sequel or, like, a longer form sort of story, but I don't foresee that happening personally. I would watch it. I could possibly see... I mean, I don't know that I would pay a theater price for it. Like, I would go on a Tuesday. Tuesdays in a lot of places. Actually, if you don't know this is actually pretty good information. But if you don't know it, most movie theater chains, on Tuesdays, they have $5 movies. I feel like I've mentioned that on the podcast before, but, like, a lot of the national chains do that. So if you're on the fence about something, or if you think paying, like $12 or $13 to see a movie in the theater is a little outrageous, the $5 movie days are really good. Usually Tuesday. I feel like I heard some places do it Wednesday. But yeah, that's completely unrelated to this. But again, yeah, I could see going on a $5 movie day if they made this into something. I probably wouldn't enjoy it if they made it into a feature length, but I might just to fill in some of the gaps in this. I don't think that the gaps are like a terrible negative to this story either, just personally. I think if they had gone into detail trying to explain them, it just feels like it would be so easy to screw that up, and what they have is pretty good on that level, so it's probably better that they stayed away from it. In this particular case, it would have just ended up like every other haunting movie at that point. So, not that this is terribly different, but again, it's just the meat of the story without any of the chaff. So, I know I'm mixing metaphors, but whatever. Anyway, that's my review of The Maiden from 2016. So, the other movie I guess I'm going to talk about today is Last Shift from 2014. Now, I hadn't really been avoiding it, but this is one of those movies on Netflix that I had kind of, like, passed over a number of times. Seeing, like, the icon that they chose on Netflix for it, I must have passed it 50 plus times, saying, From the picture, I sort of assumed throwaway slasher with demonic vibes and middling practical effects. Now, this is by no means my favorite movie, and the ending definitely, much like the Maiden, left a bit to be desired, but there are such strong aspects in the rest of the film that it was almost certainly the best thing I had seen in a few weeks when I actually watched this one. Uh, so the description of this one is, it seems sort of bland and but again, there is real meat to this movie. It follows the story of a brand new police officer, her name is Jessica Lauren, on her first night on the job. Being a rookie, she's tasked with running the desk of a police station on the very last shift that it will be open, hence last shift, obviously. And she's completely by herself, the rest of the force having already moved to the new location. Being a horror movie, of course, this turns out to have been a pretty terrible idea. So, if you've seen any of my reviews, or rather listened to any of my reviews at this point, you're probably well aware that I'm lukewarm to negative on the entire idea of jump scares. To me, I just think they're cheap, they're vastly overused, and they don't build any fright whatsoever in at least in veteran horror fans. This movie, however, does an excellent job of leading these jump scares with atmosphere, cinematography, and one of the most surprisingly effective and masterful sound designs that I've seen in a horror movie of this sort of budget. It's really incredible. Honestly, with the way that they build them in, one could actually argue that they aren't really jump scares at all. Rarely, if ever, resorting to something as pedantic as hiding behind a corner to pop out and surprise you like your dick roommate. Instead, telegraphing and teasing out each scare with a devilishly slow pan of a camera or a sound scrabbling its way towards you from behind. I said it before, but the sound design is not to be underestimated in this movie, and I highly suggest that you either listen to it with headphones or with surround sound, because anything else is doing the movie and yourself a great disservice. When I watched this, I didn't really sort of expect that sort of movie, as I said before, but, so I only had this really sort of wimpy set of hand-me-down earphones, and it still completely blew me away. These sort of builds change the startlement of the usual form and function of jump scares, and perverts it to a much more fulfilling, dread and unpredictability that gives you just enough time to think to yourself, oh God, what are they going to show me? Which I found particularly appealing, I guess. The images that they choose to use at these moments are surprisingly gory or of an otherwise shocking nature. The effects are practical and far from realistic, the sort of thing that wouldn't work if they gave you more than a few seconds to stare at it. But the filmmakers were intelligent enough to comprehend this and were careful to give the audience just enough time to get the impression of what you were seeing without enough time to identify the obvious limitations of the medium, causing the brains of its audience to fill in the details in a much more realistic way than they would have been able to achieve on that budget. That was one of my favorite parts, actually. I really never thought that there would ever be a case where the jump scares to me were going to be the part of a movie that I enjoyed the most, but this might be the one. It's definitely close to the most, so. So another thing that I really liked about this sort of, transitioning into this here, it's played against this very stark backdrop of the vacated police station. It's utterly barren and completely sterile with white walls throughout nearly the entire location. And as much as I would ordinarily characterize this type of set as boring, this movie turns it into a feature. The filmmakers were really careful to make sure that the camera work helped to add a layer of interest to the scenes that don't have a lot of horror elements where appropriate. And the location is only as boring as they want it to be at that point in the story. In the beginning, the blandness actually helps to emphasize what would have, and by all rights should have, been an immensely boring and long night, asserting a sense of isolation that is important throughout the film. But as the movie goes on, it becomes a fitting canvas for all of the depravity that they have to show you, allowing you, and in fact forcing you to see every drop of blood that's spilled and giving you nothing to distract yourself with while the horrific imagery plays out. Your focus is never divided, and it's impossible to miss anything without actually looking away from the screen, which would probably be a real impulse for a lot of people with the way that the scares are built in, especially if you're listening to it with headphones. And, considering how effective the sound effects and everything are, and soundtrack, you have to rip those things out too. Now, like I sort of alluded to before, the ending is certainly a letdown considering the high level of craft in the rest of the movie. It comes in as cliche, predictable, and overused. There were a number of natural choices for the end that they could have gone with, and this was certainly among the worst. But considering how quickly they wrap everything up, there isn't a long time to wallow in their mistakes, honestly, which I think helps a little bit. To me, there's really no avoiding that it does steal something for what is in most ways a pretty impressive film. But I still think, again, this is one of those movies you sort of have to balance, and I do think that the good outweighs the bad in this one by quite a bit. Last Shift effectively preys on a number of natural fears, such as first day jitters, being alone, particularly in an unfamiliar place, being forced to make decisions you aren't prepared or qualified to make, being seen as irrational or unreliable, and most especially asking for help before having gained the respect of your peers. And many of these are not really typical of horror, especially not in conjunction with each other. The director of this one, his name is, I don't know how to pronounce this, but I'm going to go ahead and try anyway. It's Anthony DiBlasti or something like that. capital B-L-A-S-T-I. He was the director and writer of this movie, who also directed a different movie that I haven't talked about yet. Sam watched it with me, so maybe we'll talk about it tomorrow, but that was Most Likely to Die. And that one is sort of a meta horror. I mean, it's pretty subtle about it, but it's a bit of a meta horror movie, a meta slasher that, I saw the picture that they had on Netflix for it, and it looked like it was going to be just terrible. And for whatever reason, I decided to sit down and watch it, and it was surprisingly good. I was decently impressed. I know that's a bit of a spoiler to that review, but yeah, both of these movies I expected nothing from, and I got a lot more out of them. He was also an executive producer for that Clive Barker adaptation, The Midnight Meat Train. I know we reviewed that one quite a while back, but if you're on the fence about this one, you don't really have to take my word for it. At least when I did this review, it maintained a perfect 100% on Rotten Tomatoes for the critic score, so just ignore the underwhelming sort of cover image and don't forget the headphones. Again, this one's on Netflix. I believe it's still on Netflix. I saw it a couple of weeks ago, the last time I was probably able to glance at Netflix besides Cloverfield Paradox, when I already knew exactly what I was watching and just searched for it, so. But yeah, no, I definitely, I would say this is a recommend for sure. If any part of that, review sounded interesting to you, definitely go ahead and check it out. It takes a little second, as I recall, to get going, but once it's there for a really long time, and it does it very well, so right up until the end, which is short, as I said. So anyway, so that's my review of not The Last Shift. That's my review of Last Shift from 2014, and that's my show. So if you enjoyed this, please rate, review, subscribe, whatever it is on whatever site that you found us. If you liked this show, the very best thing that you can do is to share it with someone that you like or love or whatever. And also those that you think would enjoy the podcast. If you would like to share it with someone and they do not use the same platform as you, or you don't like the platform that you found us, you can find us on YouTube, Player FM, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, and pretty much any podcatcher out there. If you'd like to reach out to us on social media, you can do so on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or you can email me at reclusehorror@gmail.com. Yes, I think that's pretty much it. Good night.